The period following the unification of the majority of the tribes was one of respite for the Emperor, and he turned his attention towards the development of infrastructure. Soon, the armies of the Empire were even better trained and equipped. New roads were created between the tribal settlements, new ore deposits were found, and fortresses were built to safeguard the borders of the burgeoning dominion. As ever, the greenskins sought to put it aflame, for a horde of creatures had poured down from the peaks and raided the territories of the Ostrogoths to the northeast. As was their way, no plunder had been gathered from the conquered lands of the Ostrogoths, nor had any prisoners been taken. The greenskins had simply slaughtered an entire race for the sheer love of the deed. In desperation, King Adelhard sent an emissary, known as Galen Veniva, to Sigmar, now the most powerful king in the land, and offered him his fealty in exchange for his aid against the Orcs, offering Sigmar Ostvarath, the ancient blade of the Ostrogoth kings, as tribute. Sigmar, seeing a chance to complete his unification of the Reich Basin, agreed to aid the northeastern tribe and refused to take Ostvarath, stating that King Adelhard would have need of his blade in the coming days. This will have no doubt made Sigmar a lot more popular with the Ostrogoths, and therefore more powerful in his dominion over them, which is a masterful move, allowing them to maintain their culture through this symbol of the sword of the kings of Ostvarath. Sigmar then called upon the new sword oaths of his brother kings, and marshalled an army to defeat the coming greenskins at the rivers Ster and Ava, in what is now Stirland and Aveland. For 2 years the Imperial army fought the Orcs, but the true bulk of the horde was held back by the Empire's doughty allies, the Dwarfs. The High King's warriors had held back advancing greenskin tribes from pushing further into Adelhard's lands, though eventually the Dwarf army was pulled back to defend their own mountain cities. The time bought by the sting of their axes had not been wasted, however, as it allowed King Adelhard to link his armies with the Cherusans, Taluchans, and Azaborns, and Unberogen White Wolves to smash the Orcs at Black Road, driving them back into the mountains. This allowed time for Sigmar to march north with a muster of 50,000, and finally hand the Orcs a conclusive defeat at the banks of the River Ava itself, freeing Ostrogoth lands from the green-skinned menace. This, however, would only serve as the storm before the hurricane. Envoys of King Kurgan Ironbeard arrived with news of an Orc horde of such monumental scale as to eclipse all of its predecessors, amassing in the forsaken lands east of the mountains, what is today known as the Darklands, making for the now legendary Blackfire Pass, intent on destroying the races of dwarf and man forever. This Sigmar could not allow. He summoned all of his brother kings to the Golden Hall of King Sigurd, as the Burgundian lands lay adjacent to the pass, to a grand meeting now known as the Council of 11, known as such because of the fact that the Teutons and the Bretonni were not represented, as they had refused to come to Sigmar's aid. There, the kings conferred of how they would face this apocalyptic threat. Some of the assembled kings realized that the only path was to unite into one great host, placing the overall command of the army under Sigmar. Others, however, could not bring themselves to relinquish command over their own warriors to another king, and remained obstinate. Soon, dissension and argument rose between the assembled warlords. Sigmar saw this, and was filled with contempt, silencing the dissent with a word. He announced the shamefulness of their squabbles while a lesser race stood united and poised to destroy humanity. With a tone that brokered no argument, Sigmar told the kings of how they did not stand together at this crucial juncture, where mankind could be destroyed. It was Marbad of the Endels, who was a friend to Sigmar's father, and then a friend to Sigmar himself, who first stood up and confirmed his allegiance to the Unberogen king, laying his elvish blade Ulfshard beside Gal Maraz. The other kings rose up and followed suit, pledging their obedience to the son of Bjorn. With that, the kings withdrew to their lands and girded for war. It was in -1 IC that man and dwarf finally joined their military might at Blackfire Pass, brought together by ties of friendship and honour, and driven by the terrible knowledge that if they were to fail, their kingdoms would be destroyed, and their families led to slavery and death at the hands of the Greenskins. This assembled army was known as Sigmar's Hammer, for with it he would strike such a blow upon the orcs as to shatter their strength for an age, and to secure the lands of men for all time. On the eve of the battle, Sigmar is said to have experienced a dream where he stood by Ulric's side, and joined him in drinking the blood of his enemies, while bloody wolves circled him and howled. It was a good omen. The first battle of Blackfire Pass forever stands testament to the courage and military genius of Sigmar, who recognised the inherent tactical advantage of setting up his forces at the pass's most narrow corridor, in order to counter the Greenskins' indisputable advantage of numbers. 2 miles wide, spanning the length of the pass, the ranks of Sigmar's armies were assembled tightly, for if there was even the slightest give in the shield wall, it would be the undoing of men. Rows of boulders lined the sheer walls of the pass, some say having been erected by the ancients in the honour of the gods. Sigmar had them torn down and used to fortify the battle line, warbands forming up their shield wall between the boulders, their flanks secured by solid rocks, and splitting the line so that if one warband was broken and made to flee, it was less likely to affect the rest of the line. It also reduced the frontage of Sigmar's army, ensuring the orcs would not bring their numerical superiority to pay as well as they liked. Atop the sheer cliffs of the pass, Sigmar, King Kurgan, and the tribal kings posted archers, javelin throwers, and others charged with raining down death upon the orc advance, and engaging any skirmishers seeking to make prey of the army's unguarded flanks. Before the army of Sigmar saw any sign of the Greenskin war approaching, they felt the earth tremble beneath their feet as the footfalls of these huge beasts shook the very earth beneath them. Next, they heard the blood-curdling screams and bellows of the Greenskins, calling out to their gods for slaughter and blood. The Greenskins bashed the pommels of their choppers and other weapons against their shields, even against their own flesh, screaming out to their gods, expressing their desire for psychopathic brutality that was deep within their genes and within their blood. Their gods, mirrors of each other, and each expressions of this innate yearning, this one attribute that occupies the entirety of the mind and spirit of every single one of the Greenskins in this war. The one defining characteristic of this entire race, this race of soulless desolators of civilization and all life. Dwarfs and men locked shields together and steeled themselves, knowing there could be no diplomacy, there could be no retreat, and there could be no surrender, as the orc horde was well within arrow range, and burst into a charge. The Thuringian berserkers were the first warriors to charge out to meet them, matching the orcs' blood-curdling roars with their own. King Otwin was the first to wet his axes in black blood, the already incredible ferocity of his warriors boosted by the potent herbal infusions, driving them to untold heights of bloodlust. The Thuringians reaped a hefty toll of orc skulls, and their assault proved effective enough to cause the orc line to waver, and the Thuringian flying wedge had torn its way deep into the enemy's heart. Queen Freya and her Azerborns were the second to engage the orcs. Sigmar had anticipated Otwin would throw himself into battle at the earliest sight of the foe, and had thus instructed Freya to guard the life of the Thuringian king, for he would not do it himself. The berserkers fought magnificently, but like the jaws of some trap, the orc ranks surrounded and butchered them. The charge of the Azerborn chariots was devastating, their scythed wheels and reinforced heavy frames punching through the orc lines, who were packed together like sardines as they had all rushed forward to get a piece of the Thuringian berserkers, pushing into their lines still, even as they dropped like flies from the pressing ranks around them. This instant butchery that hit like a thunderclap with this charge of chariots caused an incredible rout amongst the orcs, and they began to turn and flee. Sigmar's cavalry surged forward in response and charged into the fleeing orcs, wiping them out. This was the first phase of the battle, which saw the first orc wave defeated. Imperial historians assert, and are supported by several ancient tapestries of the battle, that the charge of the Imperial cavalry marked the first ever use of the couched lance. Now that the orcs knew the resolve of the tribes, they charged en masse in lines spanning the width of the pass, roaring and eager to face men so skilled in battle. The Dwarven army of King Ironbeard met their ancient foes with the hatred of 1,000 generations of anguish and loss at green-skinned hands, slaughtering scores of orcs without remorse, with an almost mechanical efficiency as their mighty Gromril axes and hammers sliced off limbs and crushed bones. King Kurgan and his Ironbreakers fought in the very centre of the battle. The Dwarven king slew the mightiest Black Orcs with gleeful abandon, laying about his people's ancestral foe with the full depth of his anger, and the anger of his ancestors with him. Yet the battle was never in doubt. For while men and dwarfs overcame the orcs in courage and skill, they were but a thin line of iron ready to break at any time against the numbers of the greenskins. In the thick of the battle, Sigmar was overwhelmed by orcs and trolls, bereft of his mighty warhammer and pinned down by one of the trolls. Seeing the king's distress, his ally, Marbad of the Endels, did cleave his way into Sigmar's side and threw his elvish sword to his hand. With Ulfshard, the sword of the elves, Sigmar cut down his foe's arm and killed him. But it was too late to save his brother king, for when he pushed the troll off himself, he saw that Marbad had been torn apart by the orcs without his blade to defend himself and keep them at distance. The valiant Endel king had thus sacrificed his own life for that of Sigmar's. In a moment of lucidity caused by the mental trauma of what he had just witnessed, Sigmar realized that the battle he was fighting would soon be lost unless action was taken and something fundamental changed. With a dark, vengeful fury burning brightly in his heart at the death of his dear friend, Sigmar gave orders to Elfgeir to assemble the other kings and watch the Eagle's Nest, a high rock above the pass. All men watched in awe as Sigmar leapt from the Eagle's Nest, the high rock, his warhammer held high. All those who saw it knew the sight would stay with them forever, as Sigmar fell towards the orcs with a bestial roar, like a hero of the ancient sagas. The king of the Unberogen slaughtered all about him, each blow delivered with a howl of rage, animal to the core, lupine, and filled with the blessing of Ulric. He killed and killed without thought, seeing all before him only the enemies of his race and the desolation of the blasted east encroaching upon the peace and plenty of the west. Who can say whether his unmatched show of arms was a means of inspiring the army to victory, or whether Sigmar truly intended to defeat the orcish horde single-handed? All that matters is that here and there the tide turned, as Sigmar utterly destroyed every orc that he beheld. Galmaraz filling him with hate, his fury armouring him in thunder, and mighty Ulric pouring lightning into his veins. 100 orcs were dead around him, their circle breaking as they scrambled away in utter fear of this blood-crazed human more ferocious than any of them. Seeing this great warrior pass through the orc ranks, the vile warlord of his host, Urglug, Bloodfang tore through his own warriors to test his strength in honourable combat against this strange human king. Descending upon his great wyvern, the orc brought his axe to bear against Galmaraz, but the master of the Empire smote his winged beast and forced the brutish warlord to face him as an equal. This huge war boss, this primal force of energy, the personification and the epicenter of this great war that had gathered around him in the Dark Lands, gathered around him to send the race of mankind to hell along with the rest of the civilization, stood up from amongst the wreckage of the cratered head of his wyvern steed. Inside his huge tusked skull, his brain, murderous as it was tempered through the trial of thousands upon thousands of fights and battles and wars with different races and tribes of orcs from all across the Southlands, tempered into an unflinching, unstoppable engine of violence, a simple mechanism to guide his huge body towards genocide and murder. In a split second that seemed to last for millennia, Sigmar looked into the orc's stony eyes and could see no soul, nothing that would give Sigmar any second thought about wiping this entire race from the surface of the old world. And then suddenly, the huge abomination surged forward with the disgusting speed for a creature of its bulk, and battle was joined between these two great generals of different species. After a long, brutal conquest of raw strength, Sigmar disarmed Bloodfang, smashing his hammer into his huge green hand, and brought the ancestral warhammer of the Dwarf Kings down upon his huge skull, shattering it completely. In an explosion of thick skull fragments, black blood, and disgusting, subhuman brain matter. Tired and spent from the battle, Sigmar saw the orcish warriors stare at him, first with awe at his victory, and then with predatory looks as they gathered around to finish what their master had started. His hammer now slipped from his grasp, and with no other weapon at hand, Sigmar could not defend himself. He hoped that this battle was enough to gain passage into Ulric's halls. Suddenly, a white-shafted arrow punched through the visor of a black orc in front of him, and then another followed, until a flurry of arrows thudded into the orc ranks, followed by roars of triumph. The rest of the army had broken through, and the warriors of the Empire charged forth to protect their leader. Azerborn warrior women shrieked as they tore orcs to pieces alongside Unberogen, Tutagen, Cheruzan, Endels, Morogans, and Menogoths. Thurungian berserkers rushed headlong into the deteriorating orc lines and slaughtered like madmen, with Udos's clansmen not far behind. With their warlord dead, the terrible will and intimidation that was binding the fractious orc tribes together was destroyed, and they could not mount an adequate defense against this onslaught. The old jealousies and rivalries of these animals erupted, and the orcs turned upon each other even as they routed, the ones behind cutting at ones in front in order to speed their personal retreat from the jaws of death. Within moments, the once indomitable orc army was little more than panicked, fleeing, a mob of animals. With the defeat of the orcs at Blackfire, the security of the lands of the 12 tribes was assured. King Marbad was afforded the funeral rites of the greatest heroes, for such he deserved, and was carried onto his pyre by his fellow kings and his heir. Not only was the race of men saved, but so was the Dwarven domain. In heartfelt gratitude, King Kurgan Ironbeard pledged that he would charge Ulric with the creation of 12 magnificent blades in thanks to the Empire of Man for their shared brotherhood. These blades would later be known as the 12 rune fangs of the Empire, which continue to be wielded by the counts of the Empire to this day. After the battle, Sigmar's fame spread wide and far, renowned as a hero. Upon the anvil of war and the fires of battle, At last his dream of a united empire had been realized, for men of all tribes had stood together in the battle line as brothers, and with the truth of their common enemy now made obvious, the old tribal hatreds had evaporated away, replaced by only iron-hard ties of brotherhood, bathed in blood. With the victory, it is said that the kings, and then their tribesmen, all dropped to a knee within the pass before Sigmar, accepting him as their new lord. Thus, the Empire of Man was at last created.
Kom